In the development of sperm, right, through the process known as meiosis, meiosis 1 is known as what? Meiosis 1 is known as what? What kind of division? Reduction division. Meiosis 2 is known as equatorial division. The meiosis 1 is reduction division. Meiosis 2 is equatorial division. There's a lag. I'm just going to shut off my camera. I don't think we need that. Okay. So you have to put in the order, for example, the development of sperm. For example, development of sperm start from spermatogonium to primary spermatocyte, secondary spermatocyte, spermatid, and spermatozoa. So you guys have to know the order of this, right? And in what cell is the first cell that you see with a haploid numbers of chromosome in the spermatogenesis? In what cells do you first see a half number of chromosome in spermatogenesis? Okay. The answer is no, that's not the first. Spermatid is over here, it's not the first. Okay. The secondary spermatocyte, yeah, right here. Okay. And secondary spermatocyte undergoes meiosis 1. It's not spermatocyte. There's two kinds of spermatocyte. There's primary spermatocyte and secondary. So you have to quantify it and say which one. If you say spermatocyte, you're going to be wrong. It has to be secondary spermatocyte. Secondary spermatocyte undergoes meiosis 1 or meiosis 2. It will undergoes meiosis 2. Okay. All right. I don't think you guys are ready for the exam yet. In what stage of meiosis where you might see tetrads or allele exchange between sister chromatids? In what stage of meiosis?
Professor, can you repeat the question? I cannot hear you very well.
Yeah. The question is, where? No, you guys, you get all your wrong answer out now. In what stage of meiosis where tetrads develop and genetic exchange occur between sister chromatids?
The crossover?
Yeah. In what stage is that? Where do you see this crossing over? Is that the prophase 1 of the first mitotic division? And again, someone put down prophase. I told you last week.
Telophase?
Right? Huh?
Telophase?
prophase 1.
Oy.
And someone told me it's prophase, and I told you that prophase will be wrong because when you say prophase, you refer to mitosis. Actually, you should say prophase 1 or prophase of the first mitotic division. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Which accessory gland produce semen and fructose to nurture the sperm? Which accessory gland? The answer is the seminiferous tubule. Okay. What kind of
I'm sorry, can you repeat the answer?
it's the seminiferous tubule. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
No, it's not. The seminiferous tubule is where you see the development of sperm, right? So the question is, which accessory gland? Okay, so it's a gland that produces semen and fructose for the sperm. The correct answer is the seminiferous tubule. Sorry, why did I say seminiferous? The seminal vesicle. Okay. Seminal vesicle. So what kind of structure do you expect to find in the spermatocord? In the spermatocord, you will see vas deferens, testicular arteries, testicular vein. But key thing here is the vas deferens that will travel in the spermatocord. There's also lymphatic vessel as well. Okay. So you guys should need to know the semen flow, right? From the epididymis, vas deferens, the ampulla vas deferens, the ejaculatory duct, which joins to the male urethra, is divided into 3 regions. So it's joined with the prostatic urethra first, then the membranous urethra, and then the spongy urethra. Okay. So you see here, this would be the prostatic urethra, the membranous urethra, and the spongy or penile urethra. Okay. Alrighty. The prostate secrete a substance that activates the sperm, okay, including prostaglandin, if you will. Semen is usually considered as very thick kind of gelatin. Is very thick in mouse. In mice, it's very evident that it's almost like producing a waxy substance, if you will. Okay. So the prostate, when it produces the enzyme, is actually to dissolve that waxy substance. So in other words, it makes the sperm now can be released from this package. Alrighty. So your semen has your sperm secretion from seminal vesicle, prostate gland, and urethra, also known as a Cowper gland. And that's usually secrete more like a lubrication kind of fluid. It's slightly alkaline, has a prostaglandin from the prostate, and nutrients like fructose from seminal vesicle. A male ejaculate about 4 to 5 milliliter, and each milliliter has roughly about 120 million sperm. So, okay. Now, with the male erection, okay, male erection is controlled by the sympathetic or the parasympathetic nervous system. Do you remember I showed you? Okay. Erection is mediated by the parasympathetic nervous system. Right? So basically think of this point and shoot. Where point is P, that's parasympathetic. Whereas shoot is the ejaculation. Okay? And ejaculation is mediated by the sympathetic nervous system. All right. Okay, so additionals to the seminal vesicle, you see here, the bulbourethra secrete mucus-like fluid is for lubrication, if you will, when it's aroused. Semen, secretion. Okay, so a little bit about the scrotum. It's the pulsal skin and subcutaneous tissue. It has ductal muscle, which it will contract, so it gives the scrotum the wrinkling appearance. So by contracting of the ductal muscle, is actually pull up the testes closer to the body, if you will. Okay. All right. Of course, each of the sides of the testes has the epididymis, right, and this own seminal, the seminiferous tubule. Surrounding the penis is the erectile tissue known as the corpus cavernosum, and there are two other erectile tissue known as corpora cavernosa, and during the parasympathetic nervous system, let me see here, the deep artery, and the deep artery relax because nitric oxide is produced, and nitric oxide is a vasodilator, so a lot of blood will enter, and this area will become hard, right? And it's more blood pulled to this area, more heat. And if this erectile tissue is very hard, there's potentially it could occlude, right, or close up the urethra. So protected the urethra and prevent it from being closed, the erectile tissue here known as the corpus spongiosum, to counter the expanding of the corpora or corpus cavernosum, this way to ensure that it is open. Draining from the penis is this deep dorsal vein. As this erectile tissue is enlarged, it can occlude the dorsal vein. So in other words, blood do not leave the penis. It's because there's no drainage. It's all of this will be occluded. Okay, so if you you know, people, some older gentlemen, for example, have hard time having an erection, there is a medication that you can take for erectile dysfunction, Viagra Cialis. And what Viagra does is that it's interfere with the enzyme that degrading the cyclic GMP. So nitric oxide mediated this leads to the upregulations of cyclic GMP, which leads to the dilation. And there's an enzyme that sort of like destroy the cyclic GMP. Now, what the drug does is that if you block the enzyme from degrading it, so you're going to get that sustained, if you will, level of cyclic GMP. And in some people, you can have erection that lasts for hours, in which case it becomes very, very uncomfortable, right? And that is a side effect of someone who's taking Viagra. Some cases, actually, patient with sickle cell anemia, how they have hemoglobin S, and under hypoxia, the red blood cell can sickle. As such the case, it could block the drainage, so the male with sickle cell anemia can have hours of erection, and it becomes very, very painful. Okay. All right. So erection, orgasm, and ejaculation, as you can say, that erection is mediated by the parasympathetic nervous system. Okay. Causes the nitric oxide to release, blood vessel dilate, those tissue will engorge with blood and will stand erect. Okay. And then continuous stimulation, particularly at the glands of the penis, you will see that the man will be excited, reaches a point, we call it an orgasm. That's when the sympathetic nervous system started to cause the bulk or the crux of the erectile tissue to constrict, thereby causes ejaculation. Okay, and ejaculation means that the semen now move out of the urethra, but this is mediated by the sympathetic. Okay, so that's like shoot, point, and shoot. Right. So you can say here that sexual stimulation will lead to parasympathetic nervous system, releases nitric oxide, causing dilation of the small blood vessel, blood accumulation, penis swell, and becomes erect. Continuous stimulation, okay, will lead to ejaculation. But the other thing is that once the blood that is flowing to the penis, it can compresses the vein, thus thereby, particularly the dorsal vein, prevented the blood from leaving. Okay? So continuous stimulation will lead to this ejaculation, and that is the sympathetic nervous system causes the rhythmic contractions of the bulbourethral gland, which secrete that lubrication, including the prostate gland and the seminal vesicle gland. All these contribute to the semen, and you get a peristaltic waves that is seen in the starting from the epididymis up to the vas deferens and to ejaculatory duct, and then all that is come out. Okay. All right, so you guys can read up the summary of the functions of the different male reproductive organs. Okay, are there any questions? Okay, if there's no questions, let's go on with the female reproductive system. So in the female reproductive system, it's very similar to the male, and that is the during puberty, GnRH will be released, and then GnRH allows the anterior pituitary to put FSH and LH. Okay, FSH stimulates the follicle development in the ovary. And under FSH influence, that's when you see a lot of estrogen. So in general, if there is a lot of FSH, you're going to get bigger follicle. All right. So follicle development starts from primordial follicle to primary follicle, secondary follicle, and Graafian follicle. So as the follicle get bigger, estrogen will increase. Okay? And estrogen will stimulate female develop secondary sex characteristic, which including enlarged breast or development of breast taularchy, the development of pubic hair, pubarchy, and she start menstruating. So we call that menarche. Okay. And at the same time, what you see is that if LH, if the estrogen level is very high, okay, during the middle of the 28-day cycle, the surge in the estrogen causes the LH to be released from the anterior pituitary. LH has two major functions I told you already. One is ovulation, and the other one is to stimulate that rupture follicle to become the corpus luteum. And corpus luteum produces progesterone. And progesterone is important to prepare the endometrium so that should you have fertilization, you have somewhere that the fertilized oocyte could implant to. Okay, so again, LH has two major functions, which are ovulation and maintain the corpus luteum. And corpus luteum produces progesterone. So in fact, what causes menstruation? You guys know what causes menstruation? What causes menstruation? Anybody know?
Ovulation?
Ovulation?
Hmm?
No.
Oh.
Ovulation is just release of the egg. That's not what causes menstruation. You guys didn't listen to the recording. What causes menstruation is a drop in progesterone. A drop in the progesterone level. Okay? Now, why is there a drop in progesterone level? Because the corpus luteum disappear. It become corpus albicans. Okay? So it's disappear or become corpus white body instead of yellow albican. The yellow body is to produce the progesterone. If it's disappear, right, it becomes corpus albicans. Yep. Okay, so one more time. Under FSH influence, follicle stimulating hormone, the follicle is going to develop, and it's the follicle that produces estrogen. Okay? And under estrogen is where the female shows secondary sex characteristic. Okay? And this is the secondary sex secondary sex characteristic in female. And this is due to the presence of estrogen. Right? So typically, um, a girl reaches puberty will have a high level of estrogen. The development of the breast, known as the telarchy, including the ductal system within the mammary gland. The mammary gland development, you know, I did a lot of my work on the mammary gland development in mice, in mammal, and we use mice as a model. And we can see that if this is the fat pad, right, so of a mouse, the ductal system usually start at the nipple and it extend out like that. Okay, so I suppose human mammary gland development is very similar. That you have a rudimentary ductal system starting from the nipple like this. But under estrogen, what you see is that this thing started to invade the fat pad. Okay, so it just branching out, the system just growing out, and to fill this area, right? And so now this ductal system is ready to go. And during pregnancy, for example, if you have a lot of prolactin, these will become lobular. So that the ductal system will become more very expanded globular. So we call that alveolar lobular structure, which produces a lot of milk, which then can be secreted. Okay, and after lactation, for example, most of these cells will die. Then it come back to its normal or as normal as possible to before pregnancy. Okay. You will see that there's a lot of fats deposited in the breast and the buttock area, their skin, vascularizations to the skin, and start menstruation, as well as the development of pubic hair. Okay. Now, one of the difficulty with a lot of students in understanding the female reproductive system is to examine the hormonal level within the female cycle, if you will. Okay, so essentially, what this does is that it shows you two events that are occurring. This is what occurs in the ovary, and what's occurred in the ovary must be corresponds to the event that you see here, which is the uterus. Okay, and because these events have to happen coincide, so that if you have a fertilized oocyte, okay, that it has somewhere to implant to. Okay. And by the way, another important distinction between spermatogenesis and oogenesis, and that is in spermatogenesis, you start with one cell, like the spermatogonium. You have a continuous process that occurs so that you have 4 similar cells. Okay, so you get a spermatogonium, give rise to primary spermatocyte, give rise to secondary spermatocyte. So you have 2 secondary spermatocytes. And then secondary divide, finish meiosis 2 to give you spermatid. And then spermatid undergo additional changes called spermiogenesis to give rise to the sperm. Okay, and 4 cells sperm look pretty similar to each other. They're Genetic-wise, it might be different, but on the outside, it is the same. Okay, they're all the same. In oogenesis, you have the similar development. You have the oogonium, which is a diploid, becomes the primary oocyte, which is a diploid. And primary, remember when we say primary, undergoes the first mitotic division to give rise to cells, which are haploid cells. So that would be the secondary oocyte. But even though it's a haploid cell, they still have sister chromatids attached. And so by the second mitotic division, the sister chromatids pulls apart, right? And so when in oogenesis, typically the spermatogonium give rise to the primary spermatocyte, and then it's give rise to secondary oocyte, and then it stops. And so when a female releases the egg is at the secondary oocyte. Okay? Only when the sperm enter, then it's finished. It finishes the second mitotic division. But if the sperm does not enter, it will not finish the second mitotic division. Furthermore, in oogenesis, you have one major big secondary, if you will, oocyte, and then one polar body. But when the sperm enter, that secondary oocyte finished to give rise to another cell, another polar body, and then the primary polar body will give rise to two secondary polar bodies. Okay, so you have at the end of oogenesis, if there's fertilization, you get your cell that has everything, all the mitochondria and major cytoplasm. That's the major cell. And the other cell, which is very small, the polar bodies. And the polar bodies are a way for the body to get rid of that extra chromosome. Okay? In fact, the mitochondria has its own DNA. So we have our mitochondria, we inherit the mitochondria from our mother, and she inherited from her mother, and so on. Okay? So the mitochondria is in the cytoplasm of the cell, and when the sperm enters, it only gives the DNA, okay, at the head of the sperm. All right, so going back to look at the estrus cycle. So the question is, how long is the estrus cycle for most people? Well, most people is about 28 days. Okay, so a month, if you will. Coincide with the moon cycle, by the way, 28 days. And in the middle of the estrus cycle, okay, also known as the ovarian cycle, which is usually is 14 days. Okay, the first 7 days, the first 14 days is known as the follicular phase. Why does it call follicular phase? It's because your FSH is ruled by the FSH, right? So FSH stimulates the follicle development. The level is very high. So follicle is still growing. Okay? So follicle development are starting from primordial follicle. Okay. Primordial follicle, which gives rise to primary follicle. It's rise to secondary follicle. And then give rise to the Graafian follicle. Right. So that's the name of the follicle. You need to know them in the order. Primordial follicle is here. Now, primordial follicles usually sit at the periphery, okay, at the cortex, if you will, of the ovary. Under FSH, the follicular cells started to produce, okay? And then when you see this little liquid here, this is known as the antrum. So the presence of antrum that's a good time you can define them as secondary follicle. Okay, so the antrum, secondary follicle. The very beginning where you see the antrum, the oocyte is inside the follicle. Okay, the oocyte is inside the follicle. So the oocyte is the cell that involved in meiosis. Okay, it also has different exchanges, as you will, starting from the oligonium, which is a diploid, and the oligonium will give rise to primary oocyte, which gives rise to secondary oocyte, and give rise to if there's a fertilization, the secondary oocyte will give you a fertilized oocyte and a 3 polar bodies. Okay, so in other words, in meiosis, okay, that you see in the oogenesis, you have the oligonium give rise to primary oocyte that's involved in the first mitotic division. Primary spermatocyte give rise to secondary spermatocyte, undergoes meiosis 2. It started meiosis 2, but it doesn't finish. And so when the egg that is released here, you can call that as secondary oocyte. That's a secondary oocyte. Okay. So right about here is where they start to go from primary to secondary oocyte. Okay. And notice that if you have a lot of bigger follicle, the bigger the follicle, the higher the concentrations of estrogen, right? So if you look at the estrogen level, see, as the follicle get bigger, the estrogen level is going to be high. Okay? That's what FSH stands for. It's the follicle stimulating hormone, a hormone that stimulates the follicle, and it's the follicular cell within the of this follicle produces estrogen. So more FSH, more estrogen. Okay. And is this surge in estrogen, that you see here in the middle of the cycle, that releases the LH. And you can look at the LH here. Okay. So you see this estrogen level is really high here. That's what is signal the anterior pituitary to put out LH. And LH is really high in the middle cycle. And now we know that LH involves in ovulation. Okay? And LH, what it does is that it actually causes this rupture follicle. So all of this right here is a rupture follicle. So under LH, the rupture follicle becomes the yellow body, known as the corpus luteum, right? And so you can think of the first 14 days follicular phase, mean that the follicle is developing. And so now under LH, the secondary oocyte release, the rupture follicle now becomes the corpus luteum. The latter 14 days, you can say, oh, that's the luteal phase, okay? Refers to the development of corpus luteum. Now, if the LH is slowly waning, it's disappear, right? So if you don't have any more LH, the corpus luteum, right, become corpus albicans, right? And what does the corpus luteum do? Corpus luteum produces progesterone. If that's the case, you would expect the level of progesterone to be very high after the ovulation, which is actually what you see here. You see here progesterone level is slowly to rise, and when the corpus luteum is present, right, you have even higher level of progesterone. And when the corpus luteum disappear, progesterone will drop, and you can see this drop of the progesterone will cause menstruation. So following a drop in progesterone, that's when you get menstruation. So menstruation is caused by a drop in progesterone.
Professor?
Yeah.
So the ovulation test, I mean, is based on the progesterone levels?
You can,
Have any idea?
No, you should actually look for the LH level for ovulation, not progesterone. If you see progesterone level too high, it's already too late. It's already in the luteal phase. So you should monitor the progesterone level. Sorry, monitor the LH level. So I guess your question is that one will want to know when you'll be ovulate if you are planning a family, right? And so the question is, when's the best time to be conceive if you want to be pregnant, right? Sometime when in some female, when she ovulate, they may have pain. They call it the mid pain. In German, they call it Mittelschmerz, which means middle pain, and that's also indicating that you're ovulating and say, oh, okay, now is a good time. I'm fertilized now. So then, if you have sex, coitus, you will have increased chance of being pregnant. But you will measure LH, and I'll tell you that. So during pregnancy, if you are pregnant, the trophoblast also put out HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin, and HCG can actually maintains the corpus luteum, right? So that the progesterone level will maintain very high. Okay, and SHG is the basis for home pregnancy tests. HCG then certainly can causes ovulation like LH. Yeah, definitely. Are there any other questions? Okay, so I'm sorry.
No, I just said thank you. Sorry.
Okay, now you will find out. I think you saw in the lab already that the uterus. Right, so if you say, okay, the ovary, right, the fallopian tube, the fundus of the uterus, comes down to become the cervix, and then the vagina here, and then your external genitalia. Okay, but this, see how this has a thick muscle? So this is to ensure that the developing fetus grow within the uterus. Um, so most of the implantation is within the endometrium. So the uterus have actually three layers: the the perimetrium. It's this one is peri, which is outside. You have the myometrium, myo, which is the muscle, and then the endometrium here. Now the endometrium has two layers. The endometrium has two layers. The layers on top is known as the stratum functionalis, and the layers underneath is known as the stratum basalis. Okay, so there's two layers. So you can say that, in fact, it indicated here. Right? So this layer right here, okay, is this kind of like right about there is the stratum basalis, and then on top is the stratum functionalis. Right? Now you saw that under FSH influence, the follicle will get bigger. Bigger follicle, more estrogen. Okay? And estrogen causes that, you already know, the female secondary characteristic. But estrogen is a hormone, a steroid hormone, in fact, causes a lot of transcription to occur. Okay? In general, you can say that estrogen influence, the cell proliferate. The cells actually do divide, okay, proliferate. In female, in the case of breast cancer, for example, there are some breast cancer has estrogen receptor, right? So that means you stimulate with estrogen, the tumor will get bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's estrogen receptor positive. So then if that's the case, then you can give it estrogen analog like tamoxifen, which then help sort of like block the estrogen from binding to the estrogen receptor as a ways to treat people with breast cancer. The point here is that estrogen influence will rebuild the endometrium. Okay? So higher estrogen, you can see the endometrium will get thicker. So that's the function of the estrogen, is to rebuild the endometrium. This is the endometrium that get rebuilt. Okay? What this progesterone does is that it actually stimulates the endometrium to secrete fluid. Okay? This is known as the uterine milk. Okay? So you can see here is that in this area here, there's a lot of, this is under progesterone influence. So there's a lot of secretion. If you look at the number of cell Y here and here, it's the same number of cell. However, the endometrium here looks thicker because there's secretion in there. There's fluid. Okay, this is known as the uterine milk. Okay? So a lot of secretion, known as the uterine milk. Okay, under progesterone, progesterone will not necessarily cause cells to proliferate, but to cause cells to differentiate, to secreting fluid, if you will. And that's why this area has, think of this as, okay, the first stage of the uterus, also known as the proliferatory phase, is where you get thickening, more and more cell, right? So if you, an analogy was this, okay, you want to grow a plant, right? So you have, 2 inches of soy versus 4 inches of soy. Okay, so to go from 2 inches of soy to 4 inches of soy, estrogen. So that's to mean more soy, if you will, right? Now, during the secretory phase, we call this secretory phase here, you have 4 inches of soy, but it's thicker because you add a lot of water in there, right? And so now if you put in the seed, it will implant. So in this case, it's the fertilized oocyte, which usually by 6 days development is become the blastocyst, and it will be implanted in the soil. Now, if you don't have progesterone, then essentially this whole thing was lopped off. So the stratum functionalis is the layer that gets lopped off. Right? No progesterone. I'll write this down. If the progesterone drop, the stratum functionalis is sloughed off, okay? And that sloughed off will lead to menstruation. Okay, sloughed off will lead to menstruation. And that menstruation usually takes about 2, 3, 4, 5 days, okay? And then, as you can see here, is that menstruation start here, 3 days, additional 3 days, right, or 4 days, and then follicle started to develop, and then you rebuild the endometrium again. Right? So this is kind of a very important slide to look at the ovarian cycle and as well as the uterine cycle. So these has to be coincide so that should you have fertilization, the endometrium is prepared for implantation. All right, so you can actually read this. Tells you it's kind of like a summary. Make sure that you know that FSH stimulates the follicle development, and then under FSH you get a lot of estrogen. And by the way, because of the endocrine system and the normal regulation is a negative feedback. So if you get a lot of estrogen, for example, there was negative feedback so that you do not produce a lot of FSH. Okay, so you can see here is that under estrogen, negative feedback, right? Likewise, a lot of progesterone as well, there's a negative feedback so that you put out FSH or LH. Now, if you don't have any FSH, you don't cycle, right? There's no follicle development. So that's the basis of the contraception. Is in the birth control pill is that they have high estrogen level. Okay. All right. And then the female secondary sex care under estrogen develops secondary sex characteristic, which we saw already are the development of the breast, telarchy, the development of pubic hair, pubarchy, and the start of menstruation or menarche. Okay. All right, so I'm going to stop here